Sounds good.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us. Feel free to join, come in. We're going to be letting other folks trickle in. We're going to be letting other people in before we get started, but thank you all so much for joining us. This is our last PPR of this year, of the spring. We're very excited to have you all. As some of you may know, we added 2 bonus PPRs, and this is one of our bonus PPRs, which we are leading in partnership with First Gen Empower to be able to bring you all a lot of great knowledge and information as we transition, as we close this fiscal year, and as we begin to think and plan ahead for what's going to be upcoming in the next year for students and for you all educators. The topic of today's session is lessons from this lessons from this financial aid season and planning for what's next. As you all may already know, or as you all may be working with students, there's a lot of different learning lessons that have surfaced over the year as it relates to what is available for undocumented students. Over the course of the year, the academic year, we've gone over what's been available in terms of protections for students, but then also what's available when it comes to financial aid. And as we begin to see students approaching college, getting ready to enroll in colleges and universities, and even consider the colleges that they're going to be attending, it's going to be important for us to think about what are some of the ways in which students are able to access some of those resources now, and then what are some of the ways that we can begin to prepare for the next academic year to continue to uplift that information. Next slide. Now, we are going to be planning for the topics that are be coming up in the fall. Those topics will be coming up soon, as well as we're going to be sharing a little bit more about the schedule of those topics. I would like to invite you all to stay and fill out our post-evaluation, which will be a great opportunity for you to be able to share your feedback on what are some of the topics that you would like for us to see and consider for the next academic year. Now, I would also like to congratulate our May PPR raffle winner, Edwin Rivera, from a UC institution. Thank you, Edwin, for filling out our post-evaluation and sharing with us feedback. That means that you will be receiving a $25 gift card. So for those of you who fill out our post-evaluation, and if you share your name and your email, we will be adding you to the raffle for the chance of winning a $25 gift card. And I will now go ahead and pass it on to Arabi.
Thank you, Rosia. Good morning, everyone. I'm Arabi. Before we get started and I introduce our incredible speakers for today, just wanted to share some quick disclaimers with you all. As always, these presentations are created for informational purposes only, and nothing we say today should be considered legal advice. If your students are coming to you asking for help with their specific immigration statuses or something related to their immigration status, we encourage you to refer them to legal resources, and we're happy to share those types of resources with you. And that stands for anything that we say today as well. We are not able to address specific questions related to students' immigration statuses, but give you more general, high-level information and guidance. Second, this presentation is primarily relevant for practitioners in California. Today, we're going to cover some trends and financial aid application rates and things like that we have seen here in California, both for FAFSA and CADA. And so just keep that in mind if you're coming from out of state. We're happy to have you here, but not everything that we share today might be relevant if you're not from California. And finally, with everything changing so quickly in the world and in the immigration landscape, it's always good to keep in mind that we have updated this presentation as of yesterday, but it's very possible that something that we say today might not be true tomorrow or next week or a week from now. So anytime you use any of our materials, including this presentation deck, please do your research to make sure you're using the most up-to-date and accurate information for that time just given the fact that this deck will not remain updated and we were not going to keep updating it moving forward. But in the fall semester, if there's any updates that's relevant for you all as you work with students, we will share those in our upcoming presentations. With that, I wanted to quickly introduce myself. I'm Arabi. I'm the co-founder of First and Empower. We work with K through 12 institutions, higher ed, and with nonprofits across the country to ensure they have the resources and capacity to support their first gen, low income, and especially right now, their undocumented students. I am formerly undocumented myself and grew up really not fully understanding my immigration status until it was time to apply to financial aid. And that's when I realized I couldn't apply to FAFSA. And that's the only application I was aware of. And it took a lot of kind of trial and error, going to community college, meeting, counselors and advisors and professors there to help me understand truly what my options were. And that's when I learned about the California Dream Act application. And that has changed my life forever. So I am so grateful for the advocacy of folks like you all for bringing me to where I am today. I'm a practicing attorney, and a lot of what I do now is focus on sort of legal and policy aspects of of things that affect our immigrant students, things like privacy protections, know your rights information, what to do if immigration agents come to campus. So if you want to have those conversations, please ping me, and we're more than happy to, make some time for you to have that conversation with you or share more resources with you. With that, I will now pass it on to our other incredible speakers for today, Tay Kang and Daniela Rodriguez. Tay, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alabi, and for Immigrants Rising and for Shannon Power for having me be part of the today's speakers. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tay Kang. I am the Deputy Director over Programs at the California Student Aid Commission, and I have been in financial aid for over 25 years, starting at the UC Davis and also at UC Irvine, and in the last 20 years at the Student Aid Commission. In my direct administration, I do ha have the beautiful privilege to administer the Cal Grant program, the Middle Class Scholarship Program, some other smaller financially programs, but most importantly, I get to also oversee our California Dream Act application, which has provided access to many, many students, including our own Arabi, who just shared her story. So glad to be with you all today and share different things that have been happening this past year. I'll pass it over to Daniela.
Thank you, Tay. And as Tay mentioned, I'm also very glad to be with you all here today. My name is Daniela Rodriguez, and I serve as the Policy Advocacy Senior Manager at Immigrants Rising. Um, and prior to that, I was actually at the California Student Aid Commission, where I got to work really closely with Tay and his incredible team, and the rest of the CSAC team, who's really committed to this work and have been really great partners to not just Immigrants Rising, but really students across the state. So very grateful to have had that experience and now get to work in this capacity and take my knowledge from that role and that my time at CSAC into this space. And now I get to oversee the policy work and making sure that California is keeping up with the policy changes necessary to ensure that all students, regardless of their immigration status, have access to higher education opportunities that are affordable and accessible, and going beyond that too, right? Making sure that once they have their degree, that they can also access career building opportunities and career pathways, and overall just economic mobility. So I'm very grateful to be here with you all today, and I look forward to not just presenting, the information and what we're seeing, but really, really looking forward to hearing from you all, what you all learned this year, so that I'll speak for Tay, so that Tay and I can take this back to our teams and really take it to the next step. So, thank you so much.
Thank you both so much. And yes, really excited to hear from you all. And which takes us to our agenda and just I'd ask from you all today that you engage as much as possible in the chat if you want to unmute yourself, because we're going to have a ton of reflection questions. The goal of today is to have a shared space for all of us to learn from each other. So not just from the three of us, but we also want to learn from you and give you a space to vent if things went badly this past year and you want to share all the challenges and all the hurdles that you maybe faced or best practices that you think worked when you're working with students and families. So whatever it is that you have in mind, there will be an opportunity to share it. So I hope you remain engaged. So today we'll talk about some FAFSA and CADA trends from this past financial aid cycle, some barriers to student access and completion that we have seen come up this past year, but broadly speaking for our undocumented and mixed status communities, some lessons that we have learned, some best practices that we'd like to share, and then finally wrapping with thinking about what are the needs for this upcoming year? How can we help you? What resources would be helpful for you to have handy as you work with our students to ensure that students are completing their financial aid applications in the coming year? So that's the general goal for our session today. If we can get you out early before 11 a.m., that would be fantastic. So we can give you back some of your time. So we will try to keep it quick and breeze through, but please continue to engage and share in the chat as much as possible. And you will have access to all of these materials, including the recording, at a later time when we follow up if you have registered for the session. All right, so before we get started, our first question for you all today is what has been your experience, or just very broadly speaking, with supporting students this financial aid season? Good, bad, terrible, enlightening, whatever it is that you have in mind, any specific stories, feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll pause for a bit. And then Ariana, if you could help me read some of the responses out, since I can't see the chat.
Josefina shared that students are afraid to apply. Families do not feel comfortable.
Yeah, thank you. And we've been hearing that a lot from counselors, from practitioners, from students and families themselves.
Guillermo shared that hesitant students when it comes to apply, especially because of the political climate.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing. We'll talk a bit more about that emerging as one of the trends and one of the reasons we think application rates have been going down. It's disheartening, and I hope to hear from you all ways that you've been able to address some of those concerns to the extent that it's possible, right? Yeah, so we'll have that conversation.
Edna shared that more students are feeling scared to fill out FAFSA or CADA and not having the information to make informed decisions.
Great, thank you.
Sergio shared when students have questions or concerns, they are often hesitant to reach out to my campus's financial aid office for help. Some seem unsure about what to ask, worry that their issue is too small, or feel intimidated by the process.
Thank you for sharing, Sergio. All right, y'all. Thank you so much. And I think this tracks with what we're hearing and what we have seen. Please continue to share. We'll move us along and continue to drop your thoughts in the chat so other folks can also hear from you. So, as we sit on some of these reflections and why we are here today, and you might be bringing your questions, wanting to learn from other folks what their experiences have been. We hope to provide a space to reflect on the financial aid experiences of our undocumented and mixed status students this past financial aid cycle, better understand trends and barriers in completing, and that's impacting FAFSA and CADA completion rates. learn some promising practices and lessons, and identify actionable strategies. So just keep that in mind as a framework as we think about like why are we here? What do we hope to gain from the session today? And just keeping in mind that, we are generally, as you all have personally seen in your work, seeing, political and larger forces impacting our students' sense of safety and whether they want to submit an application to begin with. Keeping that in mind, I will pass it on to Tay to talk about FAFSA and CADA trends from this past cycle.
Thank you, Rabi. Next slide. So normally our deputy director in data research presents on data. She couldn't be here today, so I'm going to be presenting on basically some FAFSA trends over the last few years. And specifically, I will be talking about incoming college freshmen or high school seniors as they start to matriculate into college. And as you can see here from the data, every FAFSA year is interesting. And you can kind of think of the FAFSA trends or FAFSA just being one long story. And each year is one particular chapter because every FAFSA year does tell a little bit of a different story. As you can see here from the 2020-21 year, that was the year that students were slowly starting to come out of the pandemic. And you can see FAFSA numbers were okay. You can see our DREAM Act numbers were pretty high at 7,960. But as the next year, as students were fully coming out of the pandemic, you start to see a shift where students are really thinking about college and financial aid. You can see that FAFSA numbers take a dip. And these are, again, high school seniors thinking about college. And in the 21-22 year, you can see that there's a dramatic decrease from the DREAM Act application from the prior year, from 7,960 to 5,485. So that's really where you start to see that decline of CADA starting in that 21-22 year. Now I'm going to jump 22-23, but in 23-24, there was important legislation that passed here in California, AB 469, which required all high school seniors to complete their FAFSA or DREAM Act application, unless that family opted out. And so you can see that in that 23-24 year, there was a huge push across the state by the Student Aid Commission, counselors, RCOs, many, many other practitioners who were really thinking about, having the all-in and ready FAFSA that year. So you see the shift where FAFSA numbers jump up dramatically from the past 3 years, 304,252. So that's a pretty high number. And that was really because of that legislation that passed here in California. However, you also see that although FAFSA jumped up, our CADA numbers kind of just stayed the same, right? Even with the legislation, our DREAM Act numbers still stayed the same around 5,600, although you would have anticipated because of that legislation, the CADA numbers to increase in parallel with the FAFSA numbers, but that didn't happen. And then we get to the 24-25 year, the dreaded 24-25 year, which is our FAFSA simplification year or the better FAFSA year or the FAFSA fiasco year, whatever you want to call it. But that was a year where FAFSA went through a complete overhaul. And I think, some of us may have some PTSD from that year just because FAFSA was delayed. It came out in December 31st or January 1st. And even when it was rolled out, there was technical glitches, FAFSA was down, everything was delayed that year, right? So you see from the prior year where AB 469 was in place, you see a dramatic decrease from 304 to 260,000 just because of that better FAFSA rollout. Now, you'll see in the CADA numbers for 24-25, it jumped up from 5,662 to 6,596. And you're like, wow, why would it have jumped up in the better FAFSA year when FAFSA went down and CADA suddenly went up? And the reason why is because we all know that that was the first year, of course, of the better FAFSA, but we all know that for our mixed status families. That was a tremendous barrier that year because of the FSA account creation and not being able to get their identity verified and validated. And some families resorted to having to submit paper applications and they were not being processed. They had to wait on the phone for 2, 3 hours when they call federal student aid. So what happened was in the spring of that year, the California Dream Act application opened up the KEDA basically to mixed status families. And you see that increase in the KEDA represents that increase of mixed status families opting to not do the FAFSA because of some of the technology and also what was in the chat, just some of the fears of providing that information to federal student aid. So you see the mixed status families are in that population of KEDA applications in that 24-25 year. And then in 25-26, you continue to see that increase of 282,618 in terms of FAFSA counts. Slowly starting to see mixed status families and undocumented numbers go back down to 5,937. And then in this past year, this current year, the 26-27, which the FAFSA and DREAM Act application is still open, the FAFSA numbers jumped up a lot, jumped up tremendously. A lot of that is because the FAFSA is better. 3 years removed from, the better FAFSA year, the FAFSA is better. It is efficient. It is, if you are a FAFSA eligible applicant and you're able to have your contributors access it through the invitation and utilizing the direct data exchange, a lot of these things have made FAFSA better. So there's no denying that. So you can see that many of those students who are FAFSA eligible are able to have a more enriched and more efficient FAFSA experience, and that represents in the numbers here. What's concerning is that our DREAM Act numbers are still declining. And so you see even less mixed status families, less undocumented students utilizing the DREAM Act application. And that's why we're here to have this discussion. So that is the trends. You see FAFSA definitely has rebounded tremendously from the better FAFSA year, but KEDA, despite the initial spike because of mixed status families being able to access KEDA, things have decreased over the last FAFSA seasons. Across the nation, FAFSA numbers have increased as well. If you're able to see many of the different types of FAFSA trackers, like NCAN has a FAFSA tracker. Across the nation, FAFSA has increased. In this cohort, the graduating class of 2026, across the nation, it has increased by 9%. So definitely you're seeing the benefits of the FAFSA simplification really starting to reap its benefits in the third year of its implementation. Okay, next slide. Now, those numbers that I provided on the prior slide, those were numbers up to the state priority deadline, March 2nd, April 2nd, depending on when the priority deadline was for this year. But we still have our race to submit where we're still encouraging students to apply for their FAFSA, especially those who are thinking about going to community college because they still have the September 2nd deadline, which they can still get a Cal Grant and other state financial aid and institutional aid. And so our race to submit, it measures even beyond March 2nd through June 30th. And so we're making a last minute push. And as you can see here, that our FAFSA numbers are extremely high for 2026 as compared to 2025. You look at the enrollment, as compared to last year's enrollment is down about 10,000. Again, this is high school seniors in the public K-12 system, right? So it's down about 10,000 less seniors, but FAFSA numbers are higher. So this is the first time that through this point, through June 18th, that we have ever eclipsed 70% of our high school class seniors completing their FAFSA application. So looks good so far. And this is also combining both FAFSA applicants and KEDA applicants, so financial aid applications. So looks very promising. Again, 70% is the first time that we have ever eclipsed that number. And so we're really proud of that. And we also want to just acknowledge and thank you for all your efforts to help us get to that 70% mark. Next slide. And as I just mentioned, we're still full steam ahead trying to encourage students who now have graduated from high school. They may not have, been thinking about college, especially four-year colleges. A lot of those deadlines have passed. But still, if students who haven't made those decisions, they can still attend a community college and still apply for financial aid. And that's why we are doing a push to make sure those students use and seize that opportunity. So we're really hoping to reach out to our high school seniors. We have been sending them emails and postcards and robocalls to make sure that we have their grade point average information, but they haven't done their FAFSA or DREAM So we have been doing last minute pushes to get those students to really think about financial aid. Also communicating to our adult learner population, we know that that has risen a lot in California with many of the CTE programs, counselors and educators. And key message to our students is, congrats, you've graduated. I just saw my daughter. She graduated from high school this last Friday. It was really hot. It was in the football field, but I was proud of her, and so she's part of that class. But it's not too late. Not too late to apply for FAFSA and CADA, and continue to encourage our counselors to get the message out and do campaigns within your high school and region to encourage that. Next slide. Okay. Yeah, there you go. And so this is a very sobering but realistic, data slide, right? Because it really shows what our mixed status families are doing in terms of behavior. I think it really resonates to some of the comments in the chat about fear and, apprehension, just worry. And so you can see in the 25-26 FAFSA year, we're able to track mixed status families, mixed status applicants through our proxies. And that year we had 36,816 mixed status applicants who did apply to the FAFSA and another 1557 who applied through the CADA. So we had about 37, almost 38,000 mixed status applicants who did their financial aid application in the 25-26 year. This past year, the 26-27, and this of course are students who will be matriculating to college this coming fall. You can see that both in our mixed status for FAFSA and mixed status for CADA, there were drops. 33,899. So an 8% drop for mixed status who are mixed status applicants who are applying for FAFSA, and then even a more considerable drop in the CADA. So collectively, about an 8.5% drop in our mixed status applicants in terms of financial aid applications in the 26-27 year. So definitely, I think the numbers resonate and quantify what was stated in the chat in terms of many of the families. Although FAFSA numbers are higher and they're great, and everyone's really celebrating that, we still have a population of students who are facing huge barriers, huge obstacles, fear, apprehension, and just seeking help. And we can clearly see that in the numbers here that the mixed status applicants are still being marginalized in many ways. Okay, next slide. And in terms of information and training, definitely come and check out our different resources on our the Student Aid Commission's website. We also are partnering with Institutional Solutions and CASFA on the iHeartCADA campaign. We have information, different FAQs, toolkits, other resources, really to help navigate through some of those questions. I know that when you're meeting with a student, sometimes those questions are very nuanced, very specific, very, detailed and unique perhaps to that student. So FAQs may not necessarily capture all of it, but hopefully some of the FAQs may lead you in the right direction as you're helping to working with different students. Okay, next slide. And as we come to the conclusion of the 25-26 academic year and financial aid cycle, I think, what we can say is definitely that although, there was some successes, we still see a lot of trends for our student populations that are still facing many of the different barriers, fear and uncertainty around immigration-related concerns. Definitely that continues to be a recurring issue, a present issue. Family hesitancy in sharing information. We see that. We do see that, just what are the repercussions of providing my parental information through FAFSA and federal student aid, IRS, SSA, what types of implications, would that have? Um, I will say also that, on that mixed status family slide, the prior slide, many of those who did the DREAM Act application later on during the year did convert to a FAFSA application, right? Because, these are FAFSA eligible students, but their parents or their spouse might be, undocumented and they don't have Social Security. So they are FAFSA eligible, meaning that if they did the FAFSA, they have access to federal financial aid, which is, provides more financial aid than you would just getting through the DREAM Act application. So we saw that behavior as well. We're able to track students who started the DREAM Act application, but sometime later in the cycle, they did convert to a FAFSA, and we helped them, to make that conversion process. Other trends that continue: verification and documentation confusion. Why is the financial aid office asking me for verification documents, tax documents, and things like that? It definitely does slow down the process. Sometimes accessing those documents are very, very difficult. And then again, just additional information that needs to be provided exposes additional information to the family. And even though, we do see the FAFSA numbers are high, there's still confusion. There's still confusion to some of the FAFSA changes, having to navigate through the FAFSA. It is easier. It is definitely easier, especially if your parents did do taxes through the IRS and doing the direct data exchange and importing that information. But still, some of the questions are challenging, and especially for applicants who might be in very unique situations, having to navigate through that is not easy. Misinformation among students and practitioners, we see that all the time. We work directly with K-12, CalSOAPs, RCOs, regional coordinating offices, and we hear a lot of misinformation. And um, it's it's crazy to think that, we have webinars like this and other webinars to inform and provide guidance. But when misinformation goes out, it takes a lot of effort to correct that information. It just takes a lot of effort because somehow when misinformation gets out, it just spreads. And then it just takes a lot of effort to like, no, 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 that's not correct. And so we see that a lot. And we hear from counselors like, oh, I think I heard this and I think I heard that. So definitely, continued education and having the right guidance is paramount, especially when you're helping students in this population. Equity gaps in access to advising and support. We know that that continues to exist. We see some of the services being cut at different higher ed institutions. And for the students who really need that help, it's difficult to access it when you see those services being cut. Dreamer services, resources is being cut, and other students' services being cut at institutions. So, that's why we're here. We really wanted to make sure that you understand, the different trends and seeing what best practices are out there and see what we can take back, at the Student Aid Commission and really think about the work that we do. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Arabi, I think, who's going to go through the next share out.
Thank you so much, Tay. That was so helpful and informational. And I learned a lot. And I think just seeing the numbers really help put, kind of paint like a perspective, a clear picture of the stories that we're hearing on the ground from our practitioners and from our students themselves. Um, I'd love to hear from folks in the chat. Continue the conversation and the question that I posed earlier. What patterns and trends are you seeing in your schools, in your colleges, your campuses, and your communities? Are you seeing the data that Tay just presented? Are you seeing that reflected on your own campuses? Are you seeing certain types of issues come up with mixed status families, for example, or undocumented students? Any thoughts you have on this? Would love to hear from folks before we continue to the next section. And feel free to unmute as well if you would prefer to speak out loud. I see Ariana mentioned seems to be an educational disengagement occurring earlier in the pipeline. I think we have seen this in our K through 12 work. Um, Students not quite seeing the value of college the same way that maybe we have seen in previous years. We're also hearing of instances of students having to pause their education completely because a family member or an adult in their family has been detained or deported. So they need to take care of their younger siblings. And so, it doesn't matter whether or not they want to go. That at that point in time, it doesn't feel like that's an opportunity or an option for them, which is devastating and heartbreaking. And I think one thing that we have tried to do in those instances is make sure they know what resources are available, even if they choose not to apply and pursue college right now. They should know that they can come back, that we're here, that community colleges are available for them if they want to continue to choose to pursue their education and continue later on. Or just help them think through, can it be possible for them to continue even now in some limited capacity instead of completely stopping their education?
I can share something.
Yeah,
Can
please go
everyone
ahead.
hear me good? Okay. Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Edna, and I'm the Financial Aid Programs Manager here at the CSU Chancellor's Office. And beginning this year, starting January, I started doing a lot of presentations and outreach and yield efforts across the Riverside Office of Education and meeting with high school counselors, really talking about what does affordability look like at the CSU. And one of the trends that we noticed in talking to the counselors is that this concept of like the ROI, rate of return on investment. A lot of students and families, especially in the Riverside County, students want to just work directly after high school because of like family responsibilities or other things they may be having to manage that requires a level of like financial stability. And one of the things that at the chancellor's office that we're trying to mitigate and kind of incorporate is how do we share this message that college financial aid, let's say at a CSU, can be of support to meet those needs. The student can go to college while also being able to support their family with whatever financial aid they receive. So that is one trend that we have definitely noticed throughout the work we've been doing recently.
Thank you so much for sharing, Edna. I appreciate that. Has there been any effort from the CSU to um, add in additional sources of funding to support that? So, for example, I'm thinking of something like emergency funds or something that would help students with supporting their family, or if someone were to get detained or they need legal support, like having the flexibility to use some of that funding to support their family if needed.
Yeah, I mean, most, if not all, CSUs have emergency fund support, and that is something that is available to the student. It's just a matter of them actually seeking that out. But there is that availability for students once they transition into the CSU system.
Got it. Thank you. And thanks for sharing. I see in the chat, and I'll read it out loud. I see a lot of parents worry about sharing their information. I work for Venture College, but do outreach with financial aid to their high school visits. For Dreamers, I've seen that many don't know about the 3 years of attendance at a California institutions because sometimes the counselors are trying to just graduate the students rather than letting seniors do an extra year or adult school. So I've been trying to work with counselors and have offered undocumented ally trainings, but sometimes it's hard to have all the counselors attend. Vanessa, thank you for sharing that. And yes, I think we have that's a very common issue that we have seen pop up is the ineligibility for financial aid, right, through CADA through and for in-state tuition because students don't meet the 3 years of attendance, but they don't have the time to maybe meet it while they're still in high school. Um, and sometimes that comes from, and what Tay was talking about earlier, misinformation about what eligibility actually means through AB 540. Like, how do you meet the requirements there? So I think offering trainings and referring students and staff to trainings is really critical for this purpose, right? Like, if the counselors are the ones working directly with students, they need to know what would make a student eligible. They need to understand the requirements. And so if there's anything we can do on that front to offer more resources to counselors, please let us know. I think Ariana earlier in the chat shared some resources as well, and CSEC offers as well. So please feel free to take a look at those and share with your community if you haven't yet. But thank you for sharing that. All right, I will move us along, but continue to engage in the chat, and we'll have more questions later on that we'll have folks engage with as well. With that, I will pass it to Daniela to talk about some of the barriers to student access and completion.
Thank you, Arabi and Tay, for just, setting that context to this next part of the conversation that we're going to have. Because I think that last question, the last share out response in the chat is actually a great segue to the section I'll be talking around the challenges and the barriers to student access and completion. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that it's, yes, there's like the political environment that has presented a lot of challenges to our students in completing financial aid and then getting their actual awards. But the reality is that there have been long-standing barriers, and this unfortunate political environment has exacerbated a lot of those existing challenges, but also in some way created new ones. So it all just has come to a head, is really what I'm saying. And this slide is a visual of what we've seen, not just, in this financial aid cycle, but what we've seen, in the years even before that continue to persist. And a lot of it is not, it's not by any means a student's, creation. It's by systems and policy choices and policy design choices that have been made and that have carried over and ultimately have trickled down to impacting students' ability to apply and access financial aid. So you hear, I won't go into details, but I want to make sure just to name what are those layered challenges. And what we've seen is, and a lot of you already, mentioned them already, right, and have identified them, right, that the fear of disclosure, not just of their status, but any information that may lead to the disclosure of their status, sense of isolation, right? When sometimes there are students and or their families who may be in a part of the state where they don't see themselves reflected, the way their campuses are talking about, if at all, students like them, and that they're not identifying, it's not resonating, feeling like, well, what is there for me? The anxiety about not just the future, right? Around like, well, what are my future opportunities if I'm an undocumented or immigrant student? But as so many of you have noted, there's also anxiety about the present right now. And as a direct result of what is happening under this political environment, not knowing what tomorrow will look like. So what we're seeing is our students, their families, and even the educators and the practitioners, not just, navigating the challenges and anxieties about the future, but the imminent present. Then there's also some of the challenges around parentification, where, as you know, I think Arabi was noting, our immigrant students, face a unique experience. And as someone who is first generation and a daughter of immigrants, experienced this myself and really informed kind of my own personal and professional trajectory, how these external political policy choices have really informed this parentification, where students are often not just having to be students, but also having to step into roles where they're also balancing those experiences at home. And then, of course, academic pressure and burnout, which we know is, across all students, but particularly exacerbated for our immigrant students for all the reasons I just identified. And then the economic insecurity. A lot of our immigrant students, have limited access to formal work employment opportunities, and so as well as their family members. And so having to attend school, and even when tuition is paid for, there's the non-tuition costs that students are struggling to find ways to pay. So it's all coming together. And in the next slides, you can go to the next slide actually. There are four, we kind of organize these into four buckets of barriers that we've identified at Immigrants Rising, but also across the community in this space. There are barriers around structural and systems level barriers. I won't read line by line here because actually I think a lot of you have identified them in the share outs, and I think Tay already spoke to a lot of these. I'll just point to, the bottom one around confusion between FAFSA and California Dream Act eligibility for students from mixed status families. I think, financial aid, is, again, by choices made by policymakers, is very complicated and challenging, confusing. But for mixed status families recently, we're hearing continuous confusion around what they are eligible for in California and how to apply in order to when they're navigating those technical barriers with the FAFSA. But the, I heard a story of somebody who was not informed about kind of like Tay mentioned, students that can convert back to, and so a student ended up enrolling in higher ed, and now they're they had to take out loans because they were not advised well about what their options were. And so the confusion, is not just this arbitrary like feeling, it has real implications for a student at the end of the day when that confusion is not mitigated or resolved. Then there's knowledge and information gaps that many of these, as for those of you who are looking at the screen, many of these may not be new to you, but the important part is that they persist. And so, the misunderstanding around eligibility requirements, continued confusion. But the last two, I think I want to specifically point to is because it's an emerging thing that we're seeing at Immigrants Rising, the sphere around sharing tax and financial or household information. And that has always been something we've heard and have seen. But again, what we're seeing, honestly, in the last month, has been this new executive order from the federal government directing banks to employ more scrutiny around banking and who is accessing banking services, who is holding accounts. And so it doesn't require, the executive order doesn't require collection of SSNs, but it is strongly suggesting banks to be have more scrutiny over existing and future bank holders. The rollout is still underway, so no one needs to take action on that. But already we're seeing like people are like, should I take money stuff out of my bank? Do I just close my account? And so that has that immediate impact. And we got to make sure that, as a community, we are also touching base with our students and their families because it will have implications for their financial aid applications. So that's one example that is very recent of something that has emerged that we want to keep a close eye on because it will impact students. It may create a chilling effect, and we want to make sure we're guiding our students to the best of our ability based on the information we know. And then multilingual resources. We know our immigrant community is very diverse, and want to make sure that they have access to understand the resources, but more than that, at least from my perspective, is if the visibility, right? If I am if there's a resource and I know that it's available in, 50 languages or whatever, that not only signals that, okay, I will be able to understand the application, but it also signals that I am welcomed and my existence, my identity is being acknowledged and it feels more welcoming. So that's the first slide. We'll go on to the next slide that will cover the last two buckets of barriers that we have identified. The third one is emotional and psychological barriers. Again, won't repeat what has already been mentioned, but I want to, from the four, I want to focus on the talked about concerns on privacy and data sharing, but the last one around stigma around asking for help because somebody put it in the chat and in one of the earlier share outs. I think that's the other thing too, right? In this environment, we're hearing of students who, on the one hand, it's like, I have all these questions and I don't know who to ask. And then there's others, sometimes it's the same students, they have questions that they may feel like, oh, this is not really a challenge. I can figure out on my own. I don't want to, ask someone to take time out of their day to answer this question. And I'm also saying that because I went through that too. And I think so many of us have too. But it's an important piece because right now, because of everything we just talked about, we want to make sure that our spaces, virtual and in real life spaces that exist for our students are very welcoming so that they don't have to feel like, they are a burden to any of us, right? We are here to serve our students and no question is too small, no question is um, a burden. And so making sure that we are reassuring, not just and that's going to take, verbally saying that often, but making those spaces to the extent that there is capacity, right? I know that's another barrier that we're seeing institutional, which we'll get to, but making sure that we are helping chip away and deconstructing and doing away with the stigma around asking for help. And that leads me to this final part around institutional barriers, right? Like you all as practitioners, right? Like this is a lot. It's not an easy time, and every day it feels like a fight. And professionally, but also personally, right? Like, so our students just mean so, I know mean so much to you all as much as they mean to us too. And it's a lot. It's a lot to be see not just like the academics, but also see the struggles that our students are facing. And so that comes with, having to navigate all that with limited staffing and capacity, right? You all need, and we all need the capacity to be able to not just support students, but support them well, with the thoroughness that is necessary to meet this moment. And then, inconsistent training among educators. A lot of you already talked about like, didn't know that there was a training. And then it is, and other parts of California are very well aware. So what is happening across the state where some information is not being relayed evenly? Limited knowledge around practitioners, lack of coordinated support systems. And that's important because the support systems exist. Are they being coordinated? I think is really where we're finding some of those challenges, and then the technical support. So I went through a lot of these, but I wanted to make sure that we name them. If we go to the next slide, I'll highlight one resource that, in partnership with First Gen Empower and SoCalCan, we've created to basically it's a very practical relatively brief advising a guide for how to advise mixed status and undocumented students in California. And not just like the technical piece, but like how to talk about these very heavy conversations. So really encourage you all to take a look at that. If you haven't already, you can print physical copies of it and just, have it like in your desk or your virtual desk and refer to it often. And if you have any feedback, also please let us know because this is one of those documents that, as Arabi mentioned, it's almost like a living document because each day, each week, each month, new themes arise. So definitely keep us, reach out if there's any feedback or questions on that resource. If you go to the next slide.
I'll
Um,
also just really quickly, Daniela,
yeah.
mention here that, on this third piece right here on questions to help students assess their risk and comfort, this is something that we've thought a lot about I think the risk isn't the same for every non-citizen student and family member, right? It really varies according to their immigration status and how much they have already shared with the federal government, right? If you have had extensive interactions with the federal government already, to the extent that they know your location, they know where you live, and all of this stuff, then your risks are sometimes lower because they already know who you are and where you are. The risks that we are most concerned about are with students and family members where they haven't had that kind of engagement with the federal government. And so if you're completing a FAFSA for the first time and you're sharing your physical mailing address, there's a concern of you're maybe disclosing where you live right now. And if you're undocumented, that could be a factor. So the guide, this resource really walks you through those types of considerations, and gives you kind of a framework where you can take the student or the family member one step by one step. So we hope you find that useful. If you've been struggling to kind of articulate sort of the privacy concerns and whether someone should apply to FAFSA or CADA, if they could choose one or the other, we hope that this is something that's useful. And then the last lawyer-ish caveat I will give is that despite all of this, at the end of the day, we are not able to provide any legal advice as practitioners to our students. If they have specific questions about their status, about their cases, if they have an active case with the government, they need to go speak to a lawyer. It does not override anything, right? So just really making sure that you make that point clear when you have these conversations with our students, that we can give some guiding questions, but we cannot decide for them whether or not CADA or FAFSA is a better option or safer or not safer. That's something that they have to make on their own with guidance from legal practitioners. So just wanted to add that piece on.
Yeah. Thank you, Robbie. Yes to all of that. Absolutely. And the next shout out is, we shared a lot, but I want to hear from you about what barriers showed up for you most often in your context and in your space, and which ones were maybe hardest to address, and just what really resonated with you this year. And you can type that in or feel free to go off mute and share as well. Robbie, I'm not seeing anything in the chat,
You can move
so
us along
pass it
in
to
the
you. Yeah.
meantime. Yeah, thank you. And also, Laura Monica is sharing some resources in the chat as well, to help you as you're working with students with CADA completion. All right, so with all of that context, kind of thinking about the barriers and the trends that we have seen this past year, we want to move us along to lessons that we have learned and some best practices that we have seen work. Of course, keeping in mind that not everything's going to work for you, right? Or your institution or your campus, because every campus and institution is different. But some of the ones that to think about, if you haven't already implemented yet, we're going to give a higher level overview of those and some examples of them as well. And of course, we want to make sure if something's worked for you, please do drop them in the chat so you can share with other folks in the room. So I'll take through different categories. The first one being student-centered approaches. We have seen when it comes to and keeping in mind and acknowledging completely that capacity is a real barrier here. You cannot work one-on-one with every student, of course, but with students with trickier questions and more specific help that they need because maybe they need to figure out if they should apply to FAFSA or CADA or how to complete the sort of income section of the application. One-on-one financial aid sessions can be really helpful. It can maybe also help alleviate some of the concerns they might have with asking questions in an open setting, like a kind of like a workshop setting where they might not want to ask or disclose in fear that other their peers are going to find out that they're undocumented or their parents are undocumented. So offering more private spaces for students to come and ask those types of questions can be really helpful. And we have seen that be utilized in different ways. We have gone to college fairs on K through 12 or high school campuses and made space to talk with students and family members individually if they want to stay at the end and ask us specific questions, or we've gotten their email and followed up with them afterwards, whatever works. But we've noticed that people are usually willing to share more and disclose more information in these types of spaces than they are in front of everybody else. Having drop-in support hours, right? Making sure that students and family members know that they have a space that can come at a dedicated time. Again, students of course need to come approach you proactively, and we recognize that's a barrier and not everyone wants to do that. But providing that space and knowing they can have a place to go for help can be huge, and making them feel supported. Follow-up outreach and persistence, really keeping those deadlines in mind, letting them know these are options for them, that FAFSA and CADA remain available, that if they're undocumented or their family members are, there are still options for them, right? And like really making that information as clear as possible all across campus, putting up signs, leveraging your social media accounts to get the information out, putting it in classroom syllabus, right? Or putting signs in classroom whiteboards. Any ways you can visually get it out in front of students and keep it top of mind so they're not missing the deadline and they're not choosing to forget about it. We want to get the word out as much as possible. And to that point, the I Heart CADA campaign has distributed flyers and posters and other materials to campuses. So if you want to, use some of those flyers and materials, please do reach out and we can connect you to the folks who can get you some of those materials. And finally, technical support sessions, right? Again, like being able to address some of those technical questions. And if you can bring experts from the space to come address some of those questions, that addresses some of the misinformation people are hearing, or just lack of awareness of, okay, what's available for me? Am I safe? Who's more at risk with their data getting shared with the Department of Education, like things like that. Having the right people in the room to address those questions can be really helpful. On that front, if FGE can be at all helpful, please let us know. We do workshops specifically addressing these types of questions around if your parents are undocumented, what should you know? What are considerations you should keep in mind? So if those are the types of technical support that you're needing, let us know, and we're happy to collaborate with you all to provide that support to your students next year. For family engagement, offering multilingual workshops in multiple languages, offering the presentations themselves, having them available in multiple languages can be huge. Really bringing them into the conversation, so you're not just relying on students to pass it down to the family members, but you're also bringing them into the fold and addressing some of their concerns. And having trusted messengers and community partnerships. Maybe that means working with local community organizations, maybe working with churches in the neighborhood, right? Like really getting the word out about college and financial aid access beyond just the school setting and the campus setting, and getting it out to where our family members are actually congregating and talking to each other can be really helpful, and another way to build trust in the system and build trust that they can, these are options that are available for them. Institutional practices that we have seen be really effective is cross-campus collaborations. So this is really big for undocumented students. I feel like I personally experienced this where maybe I'll go to one department on campus and ask a question and they don't really know how to help me. Or they'll give one answer and then I go to another department and I'll receive a different answer. This is a pretty common barrier immigrant students and family members often face, is inconsistent information because campus departments are not necessarily always talking to each other. So what can you do in your capacity to have conversations with folks in your campus in other departments? Can you put together a task force of people coming together to say, okay, here is the information that we're going to remain consistent on this financial aid cycle. These are the resources we're all going to use together. So we're minimizing one person saying something and then another person contradicting them, right? Again, the goal is to alleviate the misinformation and inconsistent guidance and sometimes our students receive. And on that front, staff trainings can help with this. I believe someone in the chat mentioned, trying to provide trainings to staff members on how to complete these applications. But this becomes so important in the context of supporting undocumented students because information can be so technical and nuanced. So bringing on external organizations like us or working within campus to have the Dream Center maybe lead a campus training can be really helpful. If folks aren't showing up, right, thinking about how can you incentivize people coming to the event? Can you provide a free lunch? Can you provide other incentives? What are different ways to really gather the campus together? If there's a space where staff and faculty already meet at a regular time every month, can you take some of that time to do a brief presentation on supporting undocumented students, right? So getting creative with how can you really bring everybody together in one place and have them hear this information. Partnership with community organizations, and especially reaching K through 12. Ariana mentioned this earlier. We are seeing the pipeline kind of break down earlier on this now, right? Where we're seeing middle schoolers and high school students saying, I don't think I'm going to go to college. I don't see the point, or I can't because I have to take care of my family. So how can we reach those students before they make that decision and they decide, I'm not going to continue my education? That's a responsibility and something that we all collectively have to think about, even if you don't work at a high school campus or in K through 12 generally, because it ultimately affects all of us if the students are not continuing their education. So how can you get creative with the collaborations you have to reach high school students wherever they're at to make sure they know higher ed is available for them and financial aid remains available? And proactive communication strategies, having a game plan in place every financial aid cycle. Like this is what we're going to do. Tay mentioned this earlier, but robocalls, emails, maybe mailing things out, and during orientation, making this information really, really clear. During first year, whatever type of programming is available for students who are coming in, getting it into their brain earlier on that here's what you need to know about FAFSA and CADA and financial aid, and here are the relevant resources to keep in mind. A lot of you mentioned this in the chat, but trust. Families and students are fearful, very understandably so. They don't want to share their information. They don't want to reach out because they don't know who they can trust, right? There is a breakdown of trust that's caused by the actions of our government, and the rhetoric around you shouldn't but apply for resources or put yourself out there because that might put you at risk of getting detained or maybe even deported. So there is a breakdown of trust in our community. How can we as practitioners try to address some of that and make sure that they, at the very least, our students and family members know that we are places that they can come to and we are people that they can rely on? So, keeping in mind many of the challenges that Daniela shared, right? Like students are coming in not just with one problem. It's a bunch of layered challenges that go back years and years, right? Financial aid access and not going to college or maybe not applying to financial aid is just one of the much deeper layer of challenges that our students are facing. So keeping that in mind when you work with students and really emphasizing confidentiality and letting them know you're not going to share this information, that what they share remains between the two of you. Clarifying privacy protections, right? Our resource guide that Daniela and I shared earlier talk a lot about this. CADA data, so data like any student records that are submitted to CADA is protected by California's privacy laws. So keeping that in mind, making sure that our students are aware that they're not just relying, that FAFSA and CADA are not the same in that CADA benefits from an additional layer of protection. And so anything in our state benefits from those additional layer of protections and that limit cooperation with ICE and Department of Homeland Security. So really making those types of information clear. And finally, I've been harping about this forever, but as individuals, one tangible thing you can do is minimize paper trail. So if you're having a conversation with a student and they disclose that they're undocumented or maybe a family member is, please be really mindful of where you're putting that information down. Are you writing it down? Or are you putting it in an email? If you're in a Zoom call, are you using an AI note taker? Or are you writing that down on the chat? All of that creates a paper trail that can connect a student to their immigration status. And we really want to do as much as we can to minimize putting on paper in any form, in any record that our students or anybody else in the community is undocumented. So really being hyper aware of where you're disclosing this information. If you're asking for help from a colleague, pick up the phone call. Just get on the phone, ask them for help on the phone. Try not to disclose the student's information until absolutely needed or the student has given you consent. If you're on a Zoom call, make sure that it's not getting recorded. Make sure AI note taker is not on, right? These are all the different things you can do to minimize paper trail because we are seeing institutions being targeted and the federal government seeking access to various student records. So those are some things that you can do in your own capacities to protect our students and their privacy and their data. So really keeping that in mind. Happy to share more about this and strategize some ideas and guidance that we have seen work. If that's interesting or you want to learn more, please reach out. Okay, so I'll pause here. We've covered a lot, but we'd love to hear from folks. What's something that's worked for you in your setting? Does any of this resonate with you? Would love to hear any best practice strategy, even if it's not, perfect. Has there been something that has worked well for you in reaching students and family members this past financial aid cycle? Please feel free to share either through chat or unmute yourself. I see in the chat, Guillermo said, I maintain a good working relationship with our community college financial aid technicians. That's awesome. Yeah, cross-campus collaboration, making sure that everyone's on the same page and you're having communication with the right people can be really helpful. Thank you. Anyone else?
I can share. As someone who used to deliver presentations to high school students years ago when the California Dream Act first came out, I do remember mentioning to students that they were entitled to the financial aid that they were receiving through the California Dream Act, through the state taxes that they pay. And that also includes that they also pay federal taxes, which they don't have access to that aid. And so I always make sure that students understood that when they are applying for financial aid, for state financial aid, they're not taking anything away, but rather they're having access to some of the funds that they contribute to the state and to the country. And that really comes from a place of empowerment and agency and letting them know that they are entitled to that aid, that they do deserve that aid, and that they are contributors of the country, the state, and they deserve to receive access to that support so that they can continue to pursue their goals and their dreams. So just really changing that framework of you're not taking anything away, but you're rather accessing some of the aid that you are contributing and your parents are contributing.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Rocio. Absolutely. You're benefiting from a system you're contributing to. I think that's really powerful messaging. I see a few more stuff in the chat. I have a financial aid liaison and admissions and record liaison. It's nice having someone I can go to at any time when working with Dreamers. Thank you for sharing again, the importance of cross-campus collaboration and working together. I also see here we're struggling with attendance at trainings. I've been able to get trainings on supporting undocumented students built into a couple of regular counseling and advising meetings to increase attendance and got good feedback. That's amazing to hear. And yes, we've seen this consistently as an issue. There is a want and the desire to offer undocumented ally trainings or some variation of those, but attendance is a struggle. And so I think building it into existing programming, so folks have no choice but to show up because they're already going to be there anyways, is usually effective. Even if you are getting a little bit of that time, it can be really helpful. Or incentivizing in other ways, free food, gift card raffles, anything like that can be helpful. Something else that we're working on at FGE, and if you work at a campus setting, please reach out to us if you're interested. We have now piloted 2 cohorts of a certification program where we bring on folks from various campuses that are participating, bring them all together in one place, and we offer a 6 to 7 week long program for supporting undocumented students. So that covers everything from financial aid to admissions, career support, and privacy protections and things like that. And so that's been one way for us to get folks in one campus to talk to each other because they're already participating anyways. And so if that's something that you're interested in, please reach out to us and we're happy to share more information about the program, which will be having a third cohort of that in the coming year. Thank you for sharing, Ariana. Um, I see here one strategy that's worked well is creating student-centered workshops and presentations. Because financial aid can feel intimidating and confusing, we focus on making information clear, practical, engaging through student-friendly language, visuals, and real-life examples and tools. This approach has helped students and families better understand CSU costs, financial aid options, and next steps. Fantastic. I love that. Um, and I think and making it as accessible as possible because yeah, financial aid is a scary thing and it feels really complicated and technical. Social media, I think, is a really good place to make this stuff all available, right? Having short posts you can make on Instagram, having your student workers create TikTok reels. All of that are effective ways to get this information out to students in platforms where they're already spending a lot of their time, right? Making it a fun way to engage with financial aid rather than something that they're dreading thinking about because it's confusing and maybe anxiety inducing for them. Amazing. Any other final thoughts? And I'll also pause here to see if Daniela or Tay, if y'all have any thoughts about any of the strategies and best practices that we have shared so far. And I'll go back to the previous slide.
One thing I can share, at the end of the day, I still work for a state agency. And with state agencies, we're able to be in a position where we can really think of, legislation that helps our students. And so last year, there was a bill, Senate Bill 323, which was to open up the Dream Act application for all students in California while de-identifying some of the data. Unfortunately, that didn't pass, and so we will continue that advocacy so that many of the things that were presented today and just that continued fear and apprehension, providing data, providing information, that the Dream Act application would be available to all students in California, regardless of your immigration status or, whatever status you may be. So we will continue that advocacy and, part of the work of legislation and advocacy is getting alignment and getting support from all different entities across, whether it's K-12 or nonprofits, higher ed education segments. So yeah, just we'll continue that effort to push for that advocacy and push for that legislation so that students can have access to financial aid without any fears.
Thank you so much, Tay, and thank you for your advocacy and all the work that you have done to support our students. Any final thoughts from the Immigrants Rising or FGE team? All right. With that,
But
oh,
there's Edna shared something in the chat just before we continue. Shameless plug for those supporting students who are considering going to a CSU. She shared a YouTube video.
perfect. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Edna. We will definitely check that out, and folks, you should as well. Um, I'm gonna move us along, actually, just to think about some things, and you don't have to answer now. Think about it. Let us know later. Um, One thing that we are interested in learning from you all, how can we help you in the coming year? What resources do you think are missing? What guidance do you still need? What type of trainings do you feel like are still missing from the space that could be helpful for you all? And what can we all collectively do to increase access in the next financial aid cycle? If any thoughts come to mind now, please drop them in the chat. And think about like what you have been struggling with and all the challenges that you have seen. What are tangible things that we can do and we can do this summer and leading up to the next cycle? And how can we better prepare so our students and families know that financial aid remains available for them? For us, one thing we would like to continue doing is sharing our guidance for mixed status families. The resource guide that walks folks through what considerations they should keep in mind. We are going to continue to promote that and get that out to as many practitioners as possible, especially at the K through 12 level. So they know and they have some talking points when having these really difficult conversations. But if there is a request or need that you have for resources, please let us know so we can keep that in mind as we gear up for our programming in the upcoming academic and financial aid year as well. I will move us along. Actually, I will read the answer in the chat and then I'll move us along. But please continue to drop your thoughts in the chat. A project I think would be giving high school counselors, in a high school, students a DocuDreamer checklist, for example, when to apply, to not be scared uh, if they're first marked as foreign country or coming from a foreign country because the AB 540 exists. I love that idea, having a checklist. I know Immigrants Rising has a couple of checklists already that were shared earlier. But I think to your point of, making those types of markings really clear to let them know, like, don't be afraid, don't freak out. Like, these are normal questions that come up, and here's how to address them. Um, I hear you, and I think that's a great idea. Awesome. Thank you, Rocio. I will actually pass it off to the Immigrants Rising team to talk a bit about the blueprint.
Yeah, I'll be as very brief so that we can get to the rest of the slides. But this is just, if you haven't already seen it, just last month, Immigrants Rising released its California Blueprint for Immigrant Socioeconomic Prosperity. And it's really just an agenda, an actionable agenda with policy recommendations for state policymakers on what they can do with the practitioners, with these organizations that are working with the students each and every day to help them achieve that socioeconomic prosperity, which we know higher education access and affordability is central to that conversation. So there's recommendations for higher ed access and affordability, career pathways, entrepreneurship, and durable state infrastructure. And then there you'll see like the sub bullet points on the specific recommendations on the higher ed recommendations. So if you haven't already, we'll drop the link in the chat where you can read the blueprint. And then once you read it, and if it resonates with you, really would be honored to have, your endorsement where you're really supporting this blueprint. And then the real work, so we can contact you to do the real work around actually implementing several of the recommendations on the blueprint. In the coming months. So yeah, that's basically wanted to make sure that you all were aware of that because you all play a critical voice in sharing with policymakers what you all are seeing on the ground the same way you shared today. So that's all I had for you today. I'll pass it back to you, Robbie.
Thank you, Daniela. I'm going to move us along to the closing, and Rocio, feel free to take over from here.
Thank you all. Thank you to all of the speakers. And then also thank you all for sharing in the chat and for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and then also some ideas and some of the ways in which we can continue to improve our services and information. And it's really from all of you who we really get a sense of what's happening on the ground and what are some of the ways in which we can continue to support students through our information and our resources. We do want to acknowledge that, as it was mentioned earlier, that mental health is a big aspect, especially right now as folks are navigating summer. Maybe they have lost some sense of connection with other folks. This is our final round of our wellness support groups, which actually started this week. There'll still be time. Some of them started yesterday. So if there are some students that will really benefit from the wellness support groups, we encourage you to let them know of the wellness support groups. there is one that will be starting this upcoming Friday, tomorrow. So just make sure that you do that one final outreach to students who might be interested and will really benefit from a wellness support groups. Next slide. And as we mentioned earlier, we do want to invite you all to give us your feedback. We want to try to see what are some of the ways in which we can include content and information that will be of value. So I am going to be leaving you all with the QR code and the link so that you can scan it with your phone. You can take a screenshot and save the slide. We're also going to be sending it in a follow-up email. That way you can fill it out. If you share your name and your email, you will be added to a raffle so that you can win a $25 for the chance of winning a $25 gift card. Again, feel free to scan the QR code, let us know how we did, and share your input and your feedback on additional topics that you would like for us to cover as well. So I'll just leave it here for a couple seconds. All right, next slide. Now, we also want to invite you all to take our AB 540 survey. There's a couple of folks that mentioned and referenced AB 540. We understand that AB 540 can get complicated with all of the different expansions. Everyone's situation is different and varies. So we want to encourage you to fill out the AB 540 FAQ survey to be able to see the impact that our resource has had on educators' ability to identify the options available for students. We have done a lot of work in advocacy to ensure that all of the different institutions across the board are able to interpret AB 540 as it's intended to be, which is to ensure that it's opening up opportunities for students who meet the eligibility. So we want to make sure that you get the chance to share your feedback. If you haven't had the chance to see our AB 540 FAQ, this is also an opportunity for you to access our AB 540 FAQ, take a look at it, learn more about what's included in the FAQ, and join us in completing the AB 540 FAQ survey. We do have an incentive that is available. So for the very first 120 respondents, we'll receive a $25 gift card. And any respondents after the first 120 will be entered into a raffle for a chance to win a $200 gift card. So pretty good incentive right there, I would say. And you can access the QR code here. If you haven't had the chance to capture, you can, again, take a screenshot of the slide right now and add this to your to-do list. Next slide. Now, some of the California Dream Act resources, I know that my colleague Laura added one of them in the chat. We do have the FAFSA versus California Dream Act resource when students are able to see the difference between both. Great resource for folks to be able to see what is the financial aid application that they're eligible for. We do have a California Dream Act checklist and a call grant checklist. So we all know that those are two different applications, two different processes. So we do have a checklist for both of those. We also have a guide on how to submit the AB 540 affidavit. And we also have a resource on the California Dream Act map. Now, we all know and understand that the California Dream Act does not end on March 2nd, on the March 2nd deadline. There's still work that's left to be done by students after they fill out their application and after they receive their award letters to ensure that they receive their aid. So you can reference the California Dream Act map to be able to share with students and get a sense of what are some of the steps that students need to take after they filled out their California Dream Act to make sure that they are actually able to receive their aid and claim their aid. Next slide. And as folks have been sharing the concept of return of investment on an education and what is available for undocumented students, a really great incentive for folks who are filling out the California Dream Act is that there is a California Dream Act Service Incentive Grant, which provides students up to $4,500 per year for those who meet the Call Grant B eligibility. So if students are eligible for Call Grant B or Call Grant A with Call Grant B eligibility, they're able to access the California Dream Act Incentive Grant by filling out the application. This gives students an opportunity to leverage their skills, to expand their skills by volunteering at a host site, and provide them access to additional aid. Now, because some undocumented students are not eligible for financial aid, they do have a financial gap. Typically, it can range between $5,000 to $7,000 of self-help aid, which DSIC is intending to be able to cover some of that gap that can be available for students that can many times prevent them from being able to access to books or additional resources to be able to cover their cost of living, or additional resources for attending a college or university. Now, the applications will open on July 1st. There's only 1,667 awards available, so we want to make sure that you encourage students to apply. And just an exciting news, Immigrants Rising will be hosting volunteers this year. So if you know of any students who are interested in joining our work, joining our mission, just let them know to look for Immigrants Rising on the list, which will be named on the list of host organizations in the list of orgs. Next slide. And we encourage you all to stay connected. I am the Career Pathways Innovation Strategist, and if you have any questions around career access, ways in which you can support undocumented students, feel free to reach out to me. I actually already found a great connection and reached out to somebody here in the PPR. So I want to just encourage you all to reach out to us. You have access to our emails, and if there's any way in which we can continue to support your work, your mission, or any feedback that you have, feel free to let us know. And with that, we conclude our last PPR of this year. And I just want to share and appreciate everyone who joined. Really want to thank our speakers, and then also a great shout out to First and Empower for partnering with us through these efforts. And we're looking forward to sharing the upcoming topics for the next academic year. And again, feel free to share your feedback on how we can enhance our work. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for joining us. I hope you have a great, wonderful long holiday. And keep in touch. I hope the conversation doesn't end today and you consider us part of your network and the resources that you can rely on. Thank you, everyone.